In the winter of 1917, the heart of the Russian Empire beat with the frantic, irregular rhythm of a dying giant. Across the frozen streets of Petrograd, the air tasted of coal smoke, damp wool, and the bitter, metallic tang of desperation. Here, in the sprawling, grey labyrinth of the capital, the bread lines stretched into the gloom like open wounds. Silent, shivering queues of men and women waiting in the sub-zero bite for a crust of flour that would never arrive. These were the people of a nation pushed to the precipice, their faces etched with the weary hollows of war and the gnawing ache of hollow bellies. Yet, only miles away, behind the gilded gates and heavy velvet curtains of the Romanov palaces, time seemed to stand still, trapped in a bubble of suffocating opulence. While the empire crumbled under the catastrophic weight of the Great War, a conflict that had already claimed the lives of millions of sons, the Tsar remained sequestered in his own divine myth. Nicholas II, a man whose absolute authority was meant to be sanctioned by the heavens, was becoming increasingly invisible, a ghost of an autocracy that had forgotten how to look into the eyes of its subjects. The disconnect was total, a chasm between the candle-lit gold of the Imperial study and the freezing, muddy reality of a revolution waiting to ignite. The divine right of the Romanovs was failing, collapsing not with a war, but with the hollow, haunting silence of a house built on sand. The ink on the abdication papers was barely dry, yet it marked the final, irrevocable severance of a 1,000-year tie between the autocrat and his people. In a sterile, claustrophobic train carriage, Nicholas II did not merely relinquish his own claim to the throne. With a trembling hand, he signed away the future of his son, Alexei. The weight of that signature was a crushing silence, a cold draft cutting through the grand illusions of empire, leaving behind only the shivering spectre of a dynasty in its death throes. For one singular, surreal day, the crown passed to Grand Duke Michael, a man reigning over a phantom kingdom, already dissolving into the mist of a new red dawn. It was a reign defined by the absence of power, a brief, hollow echo of a throne that had already ceased to exist. As we sift through these fractured layers of time, tracing the path from gilded palaces to the desolate depths of history's turning points, we find ourselves standing at the precipice of understanding. If these echoes of the past resonate with you, if the weight of these moments invites you to reflect on the fragility of power and the endurance of the human story, consider subscribing to join our journey. We continue to descend into the shadows of the Romanovs, where history, once frozen in amber, begins to bleed back into the light. Within the gilded confines of the Tsarskoye Selo palace, time began to curdle, thickening into a surreal, suspended animation. The air, once heavy with the incense of imperial ceremony, now smelled faintly of damp earth and late-blooming lilac. Outside, the political storm was a low-frequency hum, a distant thunder rolling across the Russian plains, Yet here, the Romanovs moved with a fragile, almost desperate normalcy. We witness a haunting montage. The daughters, once draped in silk, now kneeling in the dirt, their slender fingers stained by the very soil they sought to coax into life. They plant rows of vegetables, a humble, tactile defiance against the encroaching void. Beside them, Nicholas basks in the pale northern sun, his eyes fixed on a horizon that has already abandoned him. Unaware, or perhaps choosing to ignore, that the locks on the garden gate are clicking shut with the finality of a tomb. It is in these quiet, sun-drenched hours that the weight of the crown shifts into the crushing reality of the cell. Nicholas, tracing the shadow of the palace walls, offers a confession that echoes through the halls of history. Have I not been a prisoner all my life? It is a chilling realization that for the Tsar of all the Russias, the difference between a throne and a cage was merely a matter of degree, and the walls were closing in, indifferent to the lineage they held. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Siberian frontier, the iron grip of history tightened. By August 1917, the Romanovs had been spirited away to Tobolsk, settling into a governor's residence that the Bolsheviks ironically christened Freedom House. But this mansion was a sanctuary of shadows, a gilded cage where the only horizon was the biting wind howling across the tundra. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and wood smoke, a fragile, static atmosphere where time seemed to bleed into nothingness. The family passed the grueling hours in a slow, rhythmic exile, the click of dominoes on polished tables, the shuffle of cards, the scratching of pens against parchment as they poured their waning hope into letters that would never reach the outside world. Outside, the silence of the Siberian wilderness was absolute, an ocean of snow that swallowed their voices and muffled the world that had forgotten them. They walked the garden paths under the watchful eyes of gods, trapped in a space between a vanished crown and an encroaching dark. Alexandra's gaze often drifted toward the horizon, where the cold sky met the frozen earth, her heart heavy with the realization that the life they had known was fading, drifting away like smoke in the winter air, leaving behind only the hollow, aching ache of a family standing on the precipice of an ending they could no longer outrun. The journey to Ekaterinburg was not merely a relocation of state prisoners. It was a descent into the final, suffocating shadow of an empire. Within the walls of the Ipatiev house, the vast Russian landscape they once commanded shrank to the dimensions of a tomb. Here, the very light of the world was forbidden entry. Every window was smeared with a thick, chalky coat of whitewash, turning the house into a blind, monolithic eye staring into nothingness. Inside, the air hung heavy and stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and the metallic tang of an encroaching, inescapable fate. Dwindling rations transformed their daily existence into a quiet, rhythmic dance of hunger, a persistent reminder of their utter vulnerability. To the men who paced the hallways with rifles slung low, the lineage of centuries, the grace of the Romanovs, had been reduced to a single, dehumanizing label: the baggage. They were no longer a family, no longer human beings clinging to the fragile remnants of their dignity. They were cargo, weight to be discarded, burdens to be liquidated. In the cramped, stifling stillness of those rooms, one could almost hear the ticking of a clock that had already run out of time, while outside, the distant, thundering approach of the Civil War served only to tighten the noose, pressing the family closer to the cold, hard earth they were destined to become. In the cold, damp shadows of the Ipatiev house, Yakov Yurovsky paced the cellar floor, his boots echoing against the stone like the heartbeat of a dying era. With rhythmic, mechanical precision, he checked the chambers of the revolvers, his men standing in the dim light, a firing squad forged from the bitterness of a century's grievances. Hundreds of miles away, in the hushed, cavernous corridors of the Kremlin, Vladimir Lenin sat beneath a single flickering lamp. For Lenin, the equation was crystalline. Revolution was a furnace that required fuel, and there could be no sentimentality, no room for the ghosts of the past. To him, revolution was meaningless without the finality of the firing squad. While Leon Trotsky argued for the theater of a public trial, a grand stage to dismantle the myth of the Tsar, Lenin saw only danger in the delay. He knew that symbols, even broken ones, possess a gravity that can draw history backward. He chose to snuff out that gravity before it could pull the revolution into the abyss of a counter-revolutionary tide. To hold a trial would have been to acknowledge the humanity of the condemned. To ignore it was to declare the birth of a new, ruthless world. One must wonder, as we gaze into the dark reflection of these events, would a public trial have purged the nation of its wounds, or would it have merely ignited a longer, bloodier conflict? If these echoes of the past resonate with your own search for truth, consider joining our journey. For in the study of history, we find not only the stories of the dead, but the mirror of our own uncertain future. The shadows of that uncertainty lengthen, stretching back across the century to a cramped, windowless cellar in Ekaterinburg. It is July 17, 1919, a night defined not by the grandiosity of an empire, but by the stifling, metallic scent of cordite and the suffocating heat of a summer midnight. The Romanov family, roused from their sleep under the guise of an evacuation, stood huddled in the dim light of a single bulb. They were not royalty here. They were merely the baggage of a revolution that had run out of patience. When Yakov Yurovsky stepped forward to read the sentence, his voice was the cold rasp of a closing door. The air turned heavy, charged with a frantic, desperate energy. Then came the first volley, a violent, stuttering eruption of gunfire that turned the small room into a chaotic whirlpool of smoke and flash. But death, that night, was delayed by a strange, final irony. The very jewels the family had hidden within their corsets and undergarments, intended to secure their future, acted as a makeshift armor against the hail of lead. The bullets struck and ricocheted, leaving the children to shrink against the walls in terror, their bodies protected by the very wealth they had hoped would save them. For 10 excruciating minutes, the cellar became a theater of the horrific, a slow-motion descent into madness, where the firing squad, panicked by the smoke, resorted to bayonets and point-blank desperation to finish what they had become. The screams faded into an uneasy, ringing silence, leaving only the smell of blood and the cold, unyielding finality of a dynasty, extinguished in the dark.
Decades passed as the earth above them grew heavy with silence, turning the secrets of the forest into nothing more than whispers in the wind. Then the veil began to fray. In 1993, the soil of Yekaterinburg surrendered the first of its hidden burdens, pulling the truth from the darkness of a shallow, unmarked grave. But the family remained incomplete. The mystery of the missing children haunted the collective conscience of a nation, sparking rumors that defied the cold, brutal geometry of the firing squad. Time marched on, until 2007, when a second, smaller scar in the earth revealed the fractured remnants of those last two souls. Finally, in 2015, the relentless pursuit of science, the microscopic, unyielding language of DNA, fused the broken pieces of the Romanov story back together, offering a final, definitive answer to a century of doubt. If these echoes of the past resonate with your own sense of justice, consider pressing the like button to join our journey, helping us ensure that the stories etched in history never fade into the shadows again. We leave the blood-stained cellar of the Ipatiev house behind, moving instead into the cool marble stillness of the Saints Peter and Paul Cathedral. Here, amidst the soft glow of flickering candles and the hushed prayers of the faithful, the dynasty finds a grace that was cruelly denied to them in their final hour. A sanctuary where history rests at last.